The Jets brought in Aaron Glenn and Lance Newmark for second round interviews on Tuesday at the Jets facility. The plan for the Jets was to not allow them to leave the building and to announce the hire that day. However, both guys left the building without a deal in place. And now everything is kind of up in the air. For a lot of guys out there that don't want Aaron Glenn and want the team to move in an offensive direction, this is great news because they want to see Aaron Glenn kind of go to the Saints, where he actually has a lot of ties to. But from my perspective, and I've watched a lot of Aaron Glenn, and I kind of seen what the kind of person he's like back on Hard Knocks in 2022. He seems like a guy that can really get the ears of players. He seems like a guy that can speak to a room, and he seems like he's actually, and I hate to say this term, a leader of men, who we thought Robert Saleh was. These are not the same guys. Okay. Aaron Glenn is absolutely a disciplinarian, and he can get on someone's ass if they are not performing to the level that he thinks they can perform at. Robert Saleh was not that. He just wasn't. And Glenn has actually played in the league before. And I think there's a real difference with guys that go into coaching that have played in the league before because they know how to talk to a locker room. They've been in a locker room. Guys know exactly what they're about when they're speaking. And guys like, I hate to say it, like Robert Saleh don't have that. And they have to kind of rely on their scheme and good coaching, while Glenn can not only have a good scheme from a defensive perspective, but be able to relate to these players because he's been there before. He's been through the wars. That's why I think Aaron Glenn is actually a really good hire. And outside of Mike Vrabel, I think he's who the Jets should hire. I obviously wanted Vrabel in the very beginning. It's really going to depend on who he brings in as his offensive and defensive coordinators. From an offensive perspective, we keep seeing names like Clint Kubiak and Scott Turner. And from a defensive perspective, the only name that I've actually seen out there is Steve Wilkes, which would actually be a really good hire. It would give Glenn the ability to not have to be so hands-on with the offense and the defense, but be more of that head coach, be more of that CEO type of guy, and really put his fingerprints all over the building. And that's what you want to see. He comes from a background of Bill Parcells. He played and coached. He was coached by Bill Belichick. He went back to Bill Parcells for a short time while in Dallas. So I think that it's a no-brainer. You have many former Jets saying that this should happen, and I hope it all works out. Now, Lance Newmark, on the other hand, a lot of guys don't know about. A lot of fans, a lot of content creators, a lot of guys on Twitter don't know too much about. What we do know is that he has been in the league for a long time. He was with the Lions for 26 years. A lot of that time was being a scout and a director of player personnel. And the knock on him is that, well, he was there for so long while the Lions were just so brutal. And my answer to that is a scout doesn't have too much say on the direction of the team or what they who they draft. Okay, you got your region and you send your information up the ladder, and then the higher ups do what they need to do. He has, though, since 2021, since Dan Campbell came in, been a part of that rebuild. And going back again, I go back to the Hard Knocks in 2022. He is on camera talking about how the first thing he does with these guys is they got to pass the tape test. And I think a lot of that is lost in NFL front offices today. He is certainly respected as a scout, but opinions certainly are mixed about him because people just don't know how much influence he had on the Lions. Now, he left the Lions in 2023, and this last season he was part of the rebuild in Washington, and we see how well Washington's been playing. We see that rebuild going, and that's the kind of rebuild we want to see, that we want to have here in New York. Overall, it's just kind of seen as an average GM. But again, it's a guy that we just don't know how he'll be because he's never actually been a GM. He's an assistant GM right now with the Commanders. A lot of guys out there, are not happy about Glenn. They want to see him go to the Saints. A lot of guys want to see Brian Flores come in here. That there's so much criticism about his past relationships. Ryan Fitzpatrick had a terrible interview where he basically threw Brian Flores under the bus. I think Glenn is the guy. I am worried, though, that he left the building without a deal. Now, maybe from Glenn's perspective, he does want to see what the Saints have to say. From what we were told, the Jets made a very, very strong offer for him, and he flew back to Detroit on Woody's plane. And from what we're hearing is that he is putting together a staff. He's putting together guys that he wants to work with. That's all good things. Now, remember, Robert Saleh, for everybody who wanted Robert Saleh a few years ago, he left the building. He had a meeting set up with the Eagles, and it never happened because the Jets ended up making it work somehow. We don't know what the contract hangups are. I'm sure Woody Johnson is probably stubborn on a few things. And maybe Aaron Glenn is asking and Lance Newmark is asking for the control that they need. We don't know. It's certainly not a good look that he left, but from all the beat writers, including Connor Hughes, including Rich Samiti, including Zach Rosenblatt, including Nick Faria, are saying that this is not a problem, that talks will continue, and that it is still seen around the league that Aaron Glenn and Lance Newmark will be the new brain trust for the New York Jets. There's just a lot up in the air right now. And, the second he left the building, they were there all day. We don't know exactly what time they showed up, but we didn't find out that they left until almost, I think, like 7 or 8 p.m. Eastern. And then later on that night, we found out that he flew back to Detroit on Woody Johnson's plane, of all things. And the Jets apparently started calling other candidates and telling the other candidates that they're moving in another direction. So why would you do that if you don't think you really have it in the bag and you're going to have Aaron Glenn, you're going to have Lance Newmark? There's no reason for you to go out and contact other candidates and tell them we're not going to be bringing anybody else in for second round interviews. And as of today, as of 10 a.m. today, Eastern, the Jets have not made any announcements that they're going to be bringing anyone else in for second interviews. Now, the flip side of this, if he does go to the Saints and the Jets actually went out and started telling other candidates that they're not going to be getting an interview, this looks really bad. Even for the people that don't want Aaron Glenn can agree that this looks very bad on the team if they don't actually get him. Because this is clearly the person that they want. They made a strong offer. And honestly, what grounds does Woody have to stand on? Between all the articles coming out and all the bad press, what on earth could Woody say to bring someone here? He doesn't really have a lot of leverage. In my opinion, the conversations or the negotiations should come down to how much money do you want? Okay, no problem. Because at least from the Jets' perspective and the ownership's perspective, they should be kind of happy that someone actually wants to take the job, which it seems like Aaron Glenn would actually want to be someone who takes the job. Lance Newmark even seems like he's someone who wants to take the job. He was seen as not only a GM candidate for the Jets, but with the Bears with Ben Johnson, but they went in a different direction. So Lance Newmark was not only thought of as a good GM by the Jets, but also by the Bears. This should not be hard to figure out. If he has that interview with the Saints, I still wouldn't totally be freaked out about it unless it actually happens and he leaves. And then the Jets are stuck in this terrible limbo where now they have to, rush around, bring guys in again for second interviews when maybe they've already called them and said, no, thanks, we have our guy. That's where we're at. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you like Glenn? Do you like Newmark? a lot's up in the air right now. We don't know what's going to happen. I still think it's going to happen. I still think that the Jets will hire Glenn and will hire Newmark, and the sooner the better, especially for Newmark, because he has to get it acclimated with all these scouts that are already in the building. If they had hired like Dimitrov way back in the beginning of the process, he could have kind of cycled out some of those draft guys. Maybe got some guys in there that he wanted. But let's be real, all the lower staff are probably still going to be there, which means that this draft board could really be a Joe Douglas draft board when it's all said and done. And that's why it's hard for first year GMs, if we're being honest, because you have a staff kind of in place. You don't really have a lot of time before the draft process to cycle guys out. And a lot of these evaluations are almost done. All the driving has been done. All the notes have been done. All the meetings, for the most part, have been done. Now you go in and build your board. And if you don't have guys in there that you're familiar with, that you've worked with, it could become a mess. And that's why I think this first draft, if it is Lance Newmark, whoever the GM is going to be sketchy, because I think the board is going to have a lot of Joe Douglas fingerprints all over it still. And Newmark really won't get a chance to build this team at least until 2026. Again, let me know what you guys think in the comments. We will see what happens.